We begin this morning with the Justice Department that has spent the last 11 months going out of its way to protect the personal interests of the president. That appeared to be the case initially in the handling of the Epstein files. But now, as it continues to release the documents in a steady drip, the DOJ is working against the president's interests in a manner that Politico calls the 2025 version of WikiLeaks. Instead of releasing all of the files 9 days ago, as required by law, flooding the zone with documents possibly helping the White House move past this controversy, the DOJ has prolonged the damage, giving journalists like us time to pick through each partial release before the next one comes. And it seems like Trump might realize that his interests are not being served. He has continued to lash out on social media about the Epstein files, including asking when the DOJ will say, quote, no more. Joining us now is Paul Butler, Georgetown law professor, MS Now legal analyst, and former federal prosecutor, and Joyce Vance, MS Now legal analyst and former U.S. attorney. Joyce, you also write a very good Substack, and I thought your latest that you wrote that published on December 27th was very interesting. I hadn't heard anyone say this. You look at the tweet from Donald Trump on the 25th, on Christmas Day, where he kind of goes through all of these things that seemingly he knows. And what you write here is, he looks like a witness to me. In his social media post, Trump offered up some specifics that he might have more information about. People who loved Jeffrey Epstein, people who gave Jeffrey Epstein bundles of money, people who went to Jeffrey Epstein's island in parties, why Trump dropped Jeffrey Epstein long before it became fashionable to do so. As Trump says, he dropped him like a dog. Joyce, this is fascinating. If you were a prosecutor in the case, if you were at the DOJ right now, it seems like you would want to talk to someone who seemingly has all this information.
Well, you absolutely would. Particularly, you'd want to know what led to the dissolution of the relationship, since that seems to have been something that in Donald Trump's mind was very important information about Jeffrey Epstein, enough for him to abandon that relationship. But, you know, we obviously don't live in a normal world. Neither Paul nor I are at the Justice Department. But that doesn't mean that there couldn't be situations where Trump would be a witness. Certainly, if something were to happen in Congress, like the midterm elections that led to investigative oversight hearings on the Hill, because Congress has a serious job here to write new laws to prevent this from happening in the future. And of course, theoretically, although very unlikely, they could seek testimony from the president. But there's also the possibility that we'll see renewed civil lawsuits based on some of this new information. And in that sort of a setting, the president could certainly be called as a witness, could be deposed, as he has been in other civil cases.
Paul, in addition to the potential information that President Trump may have that Joyce was laying out, the FBI is saying that, the Justice Department is saying that there's 1 million more documents that just seem to have appeared from the Southern District of New York, and the FBI. I mean, last I checked, the FBI was supposed to deliver all of the Epstein-related documents by February 28th of this year. That was, 10 months ago? So how does something like this happen? And is there any inspectors general that can look into it about how this happened, how these million documents went overlooked?
So the Epstein Files Transparency Act required that all of the documents, the complete file, be produced 9 days ago, December 19th. It didn't include an option for the Attorney General to turn in her homework late, basically whenever she feels like it. I think there are two things that are going on. One is they think that they can get away with what they're doing, with this slowly releasing whatever they feel like it, whenever they feel like it. They think that there won't be consequences, that the Republicans in Congress won't be demanding that they follow the law. But the other issue is they don't know what they're doing. And think about the work here. There's evidence at Main Justice, at FBI headquarters, at U.S. Attorney's offices in Florida and New York. So what have we seen? We've seen them release some materials, then hours later try to take some off the internet. Taking something off the internet isn't really a thing.
Not anymore, no.
But then they put them back on the internet, and sometimes they're in a different order, and we don't know why or what, because they don't say.
And let's not forget the fact that when they have these redactions and people were on TikTok putting the redactions. We have this from Wall Street Journal. And yet another snafu. It was soon discovered that some of the redacted materials could be unredacted simply by copying and pasting them into a new document. Within days, internet sleuths were posting the workaround on social media alongside withering criticism of the government. Some Epstein files can be redacted with this trick. They are so incompetent, posted one Instagram user. Joyce, this feels like amateur hour. You know, like the redacting of documents, in this case, in every case, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, is to protect survivors and victims, to protect the innocent, is to protect maybe sources and methods when it's a national security issue. And usually people take that very serious, and you're not just able to copy and paste it into a document with the workaround. What happened here?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just a serious matter. There are some legal protections, for instance, for personally identifying information. And although this problem didn't exist throughout the release, there were some documents where control paste didn't work to reveal what was underneath the redactions. There were some instances where it did, which suggests that the process is hasty and poorly supervised. You know, there's been an enormous brain drain at the Justice Department. Yeah. And that affects not just top-level prosecutors, but it also impacts staff who are very skilled at accomplishing this sort of process, which is really bread and butter work for the Justice Department, which engages in discovery to opposing parties in its cases on a daily basis. This one is a little bit unusual. It's going to Congress, but that lack of expertise is really showing at an institution that, in essence, is the world's biggest law firm and one that we're used to expecting a great deal of competence from.
Yeah, that brain drain, we were on the show yesterday, apparently 2,900, I think, was the number. Different types of prosecutors and attorneys have left the DOJ just over the last year alone, which is usually 4 times what it was last year.
Right. And Joyce, I want to ask you about one of the redactions in particular, about this photo of President Trump with Ghislaine Maxwell, the convicted sex trafficker. It was found on Steve Bannon's cell phone. That's his former chief of staff during his first term. And it was redacted in the release. A federal investigator emailed another investigator saying, as I was going through the images from that phone, I found an image of Trump and Ghislaine Maxwell on Bannon's phone. We wanted to flag this in case it was of importance. But the photo was redacted. Why redact that photo? Is this normal procedure at all?
Right. And so the reality is we don't know. Typically, redactions are made to protect, for instance, the identity of victims or survivors. We don't know if there's a third person pictured in that photograph. It doesn't seem to be the case. And so it's difficult to reject the notion that perhaps this is more to protect Donald Trump than it is for some other sort of reason that would normally lead to a redaction. Of course, the Justice Department owes, on the 15th day after the release was due, they owe an explanation to Congress of what they've done and what they haven't done. If Congress has any backbone at all and willingness to enforce the law that it passed here, the Epstein Transparency Act, then I think we can expect to see the Attorney General on the Hill testifying to explain situations like this particular redaction.
You know, one of the things that is really interesting, I think maybe probably to all of us, especially us in the show, when I read into the segment, the thing that's been gnawing at us is the President of the United States and his team usually flood the zone. This is the drip, drip, drip of this information, and it makes it easier for us to go through it, but it also, Paul, causes less trust and more questions about who is protecting whom, right? What's being hidden? Maybe there's nothing being hidden, right? But that doesn't stop this kind of thing circulating all of this, right? Besides the people who already believe a lot of conspiracy theories and the questions, but like real questions about what's in this what in all these documents. Had they just released it all, we'd still be probably digging through to find, you know, the proverbial needle in a haystack.
Yeah, so the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General continue to act like their most important government responsibility is to protect Donald Trump. So remember, the Attorney General represented Trump in his first impeachment. The Deputy Attorney General represented Trump in the Manhattan hush money trial. And now the American people have to rely on their integrity and their good faith that they're now representing the interest of the United States and not their former client, Donald Trump.
New reaction to details trickling out as media outlets work to investigate leads from tens of thousands of documents released in the latest batch of Epstein files. And as DOJ presides over 1 million more documents they promise to release. Here's Congressman Eric Swalwell.
The Attorney General had referenced about 8 months ago that SDNY, where these documents have just been found, had documents that she wasn't aware of back then. So just imagine if you're a career prosecutor and you went to the Department of Justice, to put bad guys away, stop public corruption, fight terrorism, and now you find yourself scrubbing through, 1 million documents to keep the president's name, redacted and disconnected from the world's most notorious child sex trafficker. That's what DOJ lawyers and FBI agents are doing right now.
That was California Congressman Eric Swalwell. Joining me now is Christy Greenberg, former federal prosecutor, former deputy head of the criminal division at SDNY, and now legal analyst at MS Now. Christy, I'm so glad you're with us. What is your assessment of how DOJ is managing the drip, drip, drip release of all of these files?
It's chaotic, and it really doesn't need to be. What they have communicated over the course of this year has really been puzzling. Back in February, you had Pam Bondi saying that she asked for all of the files from SDNY and that she was surprised that there were only about 200 pages of documents. That made no sense on its face. Anybody, you don't have to be a lawyer to know there would be more than 200 documents, in this case. Then she said that there was a whistleblower from the FBI who alerted her to the fact that there were thousands of documents. Well, of course, it's even more than that. All one would need to do is go to the court filings in the Maxwell case, and you will see in a public filing that there was 2.7 million pages of discovery that was produced in the Ghislaine Maxwell case. 2.7 million. So I don't understand why on December 19th, when the documents were due under the Epstein Files Transparency Act, the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, said that several 100,000 documents were released, and then over the next couple of weeks, he expected several 100,000 more. I'm a lawyer, I'm not a mathematician, but that doesn't add up to 2.7 million in discovery that was produced in the Maxwell case that would arguably need to also be produced and released in connection with this act. So the fact that we keep coming up with, there's 1 million more, there's 1 million more, like there's a surprise, there should be no surprises here. The prosecutors in this case, there is a case file. These materials are filed, imaged and loaded electronically for the most part. Yes, there are some physical documents that may not be, but for the most part, these things are electronically filed. There should be no surprises here. This is, incompetence at best, intentional choices not to look for files at worst. And because they're not communicating clearly, we don't know what is what.
So you may have seen this newly released and heavily redacted interview with an accuser who claims she was introduced to Epstein at age 14. She shares graphic details of her unwillingness to fully comply with his requests and allege he gifted her Victoria's Secret's underwear, concert tickets, offered her a trip to Paris, and had nude photos taken of her when she was 16. Like most of the files released, MS Now can provide no context for this document and cannot confirm whether the allegations in it are true. It's dated August 13th, 2007. Is this validation for the public to finally see accounts of some of the accusers?
Well, I think all along the act is very clear that among the materials that should be produced are the accounts of the survivors. That is the thing we have not seen yet in any of the materials that have been released. What you would look for, anybody who is interested in finding those materials, all you would need to do is search for the words FBI 302. Those are the reports that FBI generates whenever they interview anyone, including a victim, including any witness. We have not seen those 302 reports for any of these accusers. And that is exactly the kind of material that the act contemplates the American people should see, with redactions to protect the victim's identity. But other than that, their stories need to be told, and they are not supposed to be silenced anymore. And unfortunately, with this drip, drip, drip and continuing to hold back that really important material, I can imagine that victims are really frustrated right now, and they have every right to be.
Christy Greenberg, thank you very much.
We begin this hour with the broken MAGA alliances, the on-again, off-again friendships, and the policy divisions that have defined President Trump's second term so far. Of course, there's Trump's fractured relationship with his once loyal foot soldier Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene.
I feel very sorry for President Trump. I genuinely do. It has to be a hard place for someone that is constantly so hateful and puts so much vitriol, name-calling, and really tells lies about people in order to try to get his way.
But what the hell happened to Marjorie Taylor Greene? It's unbelievable, but she dropped out because I wasn't going to endorse her.
I was called a traitor by a man that I fought for 6 years for. And I gave him my loyalty for free. I won my first election without his endorsement.
Then there's Turning Point USA, which hosted its annual America Fest conference just last week, the first since the assassination of its founder, Charlie Kirk, in September. The four-day event quickly turned from a political rally for its supporters into a heated political showdown with leading MAGA figures trading blows on stage.
If you believe in normalizing hatred towards any ethnic group, toward whites, towards blacks, towards Hispanics, towards Jews, towards Indians, you have no place in the future of the conservative movement. If you believe that Hitler was pretty cool, you have no place in the future of the conservative movement.
So, if Candace Owens decides to spend every day since the murder of Charlie Kirk casting aspersions at TPUSA to imply or outright claim complicity in a cover-up over Charlie's murder, to spew absolutely baseless trash implicating everyone from French intelligence to Mossad to members of TPUSA in Charlie's murder or a cover-up in that murder, then we, as people with a microphone, have a moral obligation to call that out.
To hear calls for, deplatforming and denouncing people at a Charlie Kirk event, I'm like, what? This is hilarious. Yeah, this is hilarious.
Let's face it, Ben Shapiro is the farthest thing from MAGA. Let's be blunt.
And then there's the fallout over the Jeffrey Epstein files. As Reuters points out, the, quote, extensive redactions and the limited number of documents released angered some Republicans and did little to diffuse a scandal threatening the party ahead of 2026 midterm elections. A reminder that this is a party that started this year completely united behind President Trump. Joining us now, Yemisi Egbowole, Democratic strategist and former chief of staff to President Biden's White House press office, former Democratic Congresswoman Donna Edwards of Maryland, she's an MS Now political analyst, and former Republican Congressman Charlie Dent of Pennsylvania, executive director and vice president of the congressional program at the Aspen Institute. Congressman, I'm going to start with you. This is your party, so let's go ahead and see what your thoughts are here. We have talked about kind of cracks in the MAGA movement before, cracks in the Republican Party's, the fealty to Donald Trump before, but that never sticks. But I do wonder if the fact that he is in his kind of lame duck phase, we're going to start seeing as we get closer to the midterms, Republicans backing away from him, if not slowly, at least little by little.
Well, certainly some Republicans who are in those swing districts, and I would argue any Republican in a district that Donald Trump won by 10 points or more is probably really anxious right now and might be seeking some separation from the president. But that said, there's going to be a lot of conversation between now and the next presidential election about the future of the Republican Party. It's clear that there are a significant number of Republicans who are looking for a different direction than MAGA. Some are in this party because they're all about MAGA. Others are just simply Republicans and have gone along with MAGA, some of them somewhat reluctantly. So I do think there's going to be a reckoning where there is going to be a battle about the future. Does the party want to continue down this track, particularly right now, since the president's approval ratings are pretty darn low, particularly on the economy, I think you're going to hear a lot of conversation from folks about a new direction that might embrace more traditional principles that veer away from MAGA. There's going to be a big fight, and it's just starting right now.
Congresswoman Edwards, I want to ask you about how real these fractures are or aren't, because I think for the first time we're starting to see some clear splits in the MAGA base. There are even some MAGA loyalists who are saying that they're upset with the president over the administration's handling of the Epstein files. You know, I mean, is the president really at risk here with his own base? Do you think that there is an opening there for Democrats, or that it's not real, that they'll still go back to him?
Well, look, I think we've always known that this entire movement is really about a cult of personality around Donald Trump. And the question is, I think when I look at all of the, sort of various clips of these folks, they really are struggling to figure out who's going to be the future of the movement. And I think Donald Trump, at the end of the day, is probably going to anoint whomever that will be. And so, part of it is real. I think that, the struggle over affordability is real, and Donald Trump has to have an answer for that. And that's where you see a lot of the splits with the Republican base and President Trump. But these other personalities are all vying for who's up next.
Yeah, and to that point, Yemisi, the thing about this to me is it's not the fractures in what we saw on that stage at TPUSA, what we see all the time here. The fighting that's happening isn't about 2026 for me. It's not even about now. It's about 2028 and what that primary is going to look like. You saw TPUSA come out and endorse J.D. Vance, who has not announced that he's running for president, but we all assume that he will do so. When you're looking at, you spend a lot of time at Fox News, when you're looking at how Republicans are trying to navigate this moment as they're going to come to what we assume would be an open primary, what are the factions that you're seeing, and who's in a better position? Someone who's a MAGA loyalist, or someone who's coming maybe with a different idea of what the Republican Party should look like moving forward?
Well, I see it as difference in maybe class and also in age, right? Yeah. I think J.D. Vance belongs to that tech, Silicon Valley, California. We know that he was well funded by Peter Thiel. He has high net worth funders on his side. I think he'll be fine going into 2028. Then there's a faction of folks who are kind of rising up, I would say, from the bottom. The Nick Fuentes, the much younger people who aren't as deeply tied to what they consider this huge pot of money in politics, the anti-Semites of it all. But there's also a faction that J.D. Vance doesn't fit with because he's married to a brown woman that isn't a Christian. And those are uncomfortable conversations that the Republican Party is going to have. Those are conversations that young people at that conference were having, their doubts about J.D. Vance and the fact that his wife hasn't converted to Catholicism. These are like small nuances, but they matter to the everyday voters because they believed so much in Trump, in his idea of Christianity first. We saw with what happened in Nigeria, him protecting this idea of the persecuted Christian. If they want to continue that, I think that they're going to have to really look at, is J.D. Vance our person? For Erica Kirk, it might be, but for a lot of people on that stage that spoke, the jury's still out on that.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about that, especially with you, Congressman Dent, because on the question of this Nick Fuentes, who believes that white Christians should be running the United States and that white Christians should be the future of the United States, Vivek Ramaswamy going on stage saying that we can't normalize, that the Republican Party can't normalize hatred. I mean, what does it say about your Republican Party that Vivek Ramaswamy had to even go on stage and say, if you think Hitler is cool, then you don't have a place in the conservative movement?
Well, I'm really pleased that Ramaswamy said what he said. It needed to be said, frankly. And, I've, like many Republicans, always thought that the party needed to be a big tent operation. I never thought that big tent included Nazis and Klansmen and others on what I always thought was the political fringe, that we rejected those people. And this goes back a long way, going back to William F. Buckley and the John Birch Society and other elements back then that many thought were either nativist or racist or anti-Semitic. And so here we are having this debate all these years later. And I'm glad we're having the debate, frankly. But this is what happens when terrible behavior and terrible rhetoric is normalized and brought in, and you have some out there, who continue to defend it. You mentioned a few of these podcasters or influencers or whatever they want to call themselves, who have taken on these very extreme positions, who bring in these really sketchy figures, and this is a big time problem for the Republican Party. It would really be helpful if the President of the United States weighed in on this and denounced it as well. So absent his voice, there are going to be a lot of people going at each other. And frankly, that nativist wing, you could argue by Bannon and Fuentes and others, and you maybe want to put Tucker Carlson in there too. That crowd is going to be fighting with those who are maybe like Ben Shapiro and Ramaswamy and others. So it's a shame that we're at this point, but the fight needs to occur.
One thing we do know about Donald Trump is he has a hard time going after anyone who he even thinks might like him in any way, shape, or form. Congresswoman, I want to play some sound from Marjorie Taylor Greene and talk about kind of that breakup on the other side.
I think the dam is breaking. Many Republicans may not have called him out, but last week 13 Republicans voted with Democrats to overturn one of President Trump's executive orders, which enabled him to fire federal workers. We also saw Indiana Republicans vote against redistricting. You're seeing Republicans, they're entering the campaign phase for 2026, which is a large signal that lame duck season has begun.
What Marjorie Taylor Greene has learned, and Elise Stefanik, who was a leader in the House Republican caucus, was going to be his UN ambassador, then got pulled out of that, and was going to run for governor of New York, and is now hanging out at home, I guess, is very unclear. What those folks have learned is that loyalty for Donald Trump is not just a one-way street. It's like, it's not even a street, right? Like, it's like a sidewalk where it's like just one little box where he's there, you say nice things about him, and that's the end of that. How do you think that happening and folks seeing that with their eyes might change the Republican Party, if at all?
Yeah, I'm not sure it will. I mean, when I listen to Marjorie Taylor Greene and even Elise Stefanik, they were dissed by the president. He didn't respond to their affection and their loyalty, and so they feel personally that they have been attacked and wronged, and so that only goes so far because it only applies to them personally. Yeah. And so I don't think it applies, more broadly, and they're not looking at that as a change in party. I think if Donald Trump were to come out today and say, well, I changed my mind, Marjorie Taylor Greene is a good woman, Elise Stefanik really needs to be in my administration, they flip on a dime. Yeah. So I don't think it extends any far beyond that.
We are nearing the end of 2025, and the 2026 midterms are quickly approaching. And despite holding both houses of Congress and the White House, the GOP's infighting and discontent have reached a fever pitch. And there are real questions about the future of the Republican Party and the conservative movement. The latest public example? The recent exodus of high-ranking officials from the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Foundation is, of course, the influential and, heritage conservative organization, which in recent years has taken on an extraordinarily pro-Trump agenda. Loyal Velshi viewers will remember that the Heritage Foundation is also the group behind Project 2025, which, as promised, has served as a playbook for much of President Trump's policy agenda this term. I should note that the Heritage Foundation officials who suddenly left the organization have already found new jobs with an alternate conservative group, a relatively new nonprofit called Advancing American Freedom, or AAF, which is founded by former Vice President Mike Pence. Pence, of course, drew Trump's and MAGA's extreme ire when he followed through on his constitutional responsibility as vice president to affirm the results of the 2020 election and confirm Trump's defeat. As the Indianapolis Star, Pence's hometown paper, writes, quote, Pence is seen as a martyr among traditional conservatives and a traitor among the far right for certifying the 2020 election against Trump's wishes. Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, has tried to downplay these defections. As he explains, the recent departures have been confined to the group's legal and economic teams, not broader leadership. But that explanation doesn't tell the whole story. This is now the second wave of resignations from Heritage. The first came earlier this year after Roberts publicly defended an interview between Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes, a white nationalist who peddles heavily in anti-Semitism and racism and who has repeatedly praised Adolf Hitler. Heritage's defense of the Fuentes interview was one of the cited reasons for the departure of Josh Blackman, the editor of the Heritage Guide to the Constitution. In a now published letter, Blackman wrote that Roberts' defense of Fuentes, quote, gave aid and comfort to the rising tide of anti-Semitism on the right. Blackman also says that Roberts' actions as head of Heritage have, quote, weakened the ability of Heritage's storied Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies to promote the rule of law. To that point, almost all of the personnel in the Meese Center, which is devoted to legal and judicial studies, have defected to AAF, according to reporting in the Indy Star. In a statement, AAF's president told NPR that the group raised $13 million in just 2 weeks after learning that these Heritage officials wanted out. And Mike Pence himself adds that AAF welcomes, quote, these principled conservative scholars who bring a wealth of experience, a love of country, and a deep commitment to the Constitution and conservative movement that will further the cause of liberty. Principles, experience, love of country and Constitution and liberty. All things that don't matter, apparently, in the cult of Trump. In response to this internecine struggle in the Republican Party, the president's son, Don Jr., had this to say, quote, it's great news for Heritage that a bunch of Trump-hating rhinos are leaving. Anyone who would want to go work for Mike Pence's globalist Never Trump organization isn't MAGA and definitely doesn't put America first. To him, and so many others, if you aren't for Donald Trump, you must hate America. And that essentially is the crux of the Heritage Foundation defections and the broader ideological civil war now raging within the Republican Party. As MS Now contributor and noted conservative commentator Charlie Sykes writes, quote, one of the biggest transformations that Donald Trump and MAGA have inflicted upon the conservative movement is that it's no longer about principles or ideas. It's about a cult of personality and serving one man's personal impulses. Vice President J.D. Vance even admitted as much at Turning Point USA's America Fest event last week, pointedly declining to condemn Fuentes or anyone else with abhorrent views who happens to support the president. Because, quote, we have far more important work than canceling each other. The message was clear. As long as you support Trump, you have a place in MAGA's version of the party, no matter what beliefs you peddle. Joining me now to discuss are two former Republican congressmen who have since left the GOP and joined the Democratic Party. David Jolly, who is now a Democratic candidate for Florida governor, and Joe Walsh, host of The Social Contract with Joe Walsh. Joe is also the author of F Silence, calling out Trump for the cultish, moronic, authoritarian conman he is. David, let's start with you. If you look at the officials and the departments that have fled the Heritage Foundation from the legal, constitutional, judicial, data, and economic centers, doesn't this reveal a lot, despite Kevin Roberts' protest to the contrary?
Oh, sure. It's kind of a timestamp of the Republican Party and of the conservative movement. Look, whatever you thought of conservative policy, and certainly over the decades, questions around its race and gender policy deserve scrutiny and condemnation in many ways. But Heritage was always stood up as a policy think tank that was agnostic of the Republican Party itself. It was kind of a barometer or a thermostat, a litmus test for the actual politics that were played in Washington, and it held true to conservative ideology. Heritage Foundation today is completely collapsed. It's no longer a group to be respected among conservatives. It's simply playing into the personality, the cult of personality of Trump and Trumpism. And so what you see what Mike Pence has done, you know, it's remarkable to say this about someone who has served as vice president, as governor of Indiana, a storied career in the House. Mike Pence is having a moment now, Melissa. I mean, politics is all about timing. And the truth is, advancing American freedom has become the home for traditional conservatism. Again, you can criticize traditional conservatism, but credit to Mike Pence for suggesting that there is still a place in America for conservative ideology. There are questions about how he negotiated with himself in service to Donald Trump, of course. But advancing American freedom is becoming that one respite now inside the Beltway for people who still believe there is a future for traditional conservatism. Whether or not there is a question for the politics to see what plays out.
Yeah. And Joe, the politics that we're seeing playing out are really complicated. It's not just about never Trumpers versus MAGA. We're also seeing this sort of warfare between populism versus oligarchism, and that's fueling conflict inside the GOP. But there's also, again, this embedded contradiction using anti-Semitism as a cudgel while also harboring Nick Fuentes at the same time. So how is the Republican Party going to reconcile these disparate aspects and strains within its own ranks?
Look, this is all the MAGA coalition. And let's be clear, I don't believe there's a civil war at all brewing in the Republican Party. That came and went years ago. It's Trump's party. Let's be clear. This is a MAGA party. Even somebody like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who takes shots at Trump, she embraced Tucker Carlson yesterday. She's full on MAGA. There's no room in today's Republican Party for somebody like David Jolly or myself or Mike Pence or Nikki Haley. I think we all have to put this notion to bed, because I think about it every week. Oh my God, could that party of free market capitalism and opportunity for all come back? No, it's not coming back in our lifetime. This is a MAGA party. If you want to be relevant in this Republican Party, you're going to have to embrace Donald Trump in 2026. You'll have to go down with the Titanic in 2026, and you'll have to embrace Trump in 2028. That's just where we are.
So, David, do you agree with Joe? I mean, are we at an inflection point where this is really no longer about internecine warfare? It's Donald Trump's party, and he has reinvented the Republican Party in his image. And, we're basically seeing a splinter. Like, maybe the real conservatives are going to go off into the Democratic Party. Maybe they'll create their own party. But the Republican Party, as we know it, has fundamentally changed.
Oh, sure. Donald Trump crushed the existing Republican Party in 2016, rebuilt it in his image. There have been stages of grief for the conservative movement, thinking you could fight it and win, and then resigning to working with it, and now just throwing your hands up and saying, as Joe did, the party's done. This is now a MAGA party. The question is then, where do traditional conservatives go? Look, politics is about math, and there are not enough MAGA Republicans to build a majority. There are not enough traditional conservatives to build a majority. And so we're seeing this inflection point within the Republican Party. I'll also tell you, though, look, Joe and I have taken different tacks. Joe, to his credit, has remained a reliable, principled conservative. I'm in a very post-ideological space, particularly running for governor. I just see big problems that need big solutions. And so sometimes those answers might be on the right, sometimes they're on the left, sometimes they're in the middle. I don't actually care anymore. What I know is people need health care, people need access to public education, people need access to home ownership and more affordable rent. And so where are the solutions for that? Because I think people care less about whether those solutions are on the left, right, or the middle. They just want a government that addresses their problems. And to the credit of traditional conservatives, they have maintained for decades that limited, less government, less regulation, more economic freedom for individuals is that pathway to opportunity. Others on the left would say, look, if we're at an inflection point where people are desperately in need of health care and housing and education, we've got to step in with the tools of government and provide it. We're going to see all this sort out next November in the elections because people are screaming for change right now.
Well, Joe, David is right. The genesis of the MAGA movement was this yearning for change in government, a government that did something, but also this sense that government was somewhat nefarious and shady, and nothing reflects that aspect of MAGAism more than this Epstein saga. It is so important to so many people on the right, and yet the president continues to insist that it's all a hoax and a witch hunt. How does the MAGA ire over the Epstein files play out going forward, and how will it shape this administration?
Well, you're right. That's a unique issue because Trump and MAGA promised for years that if he got elected again, they'd release the files. This was a big deal for MAGA. They promised that this would be the mother of all deep state scandals, and now Trump is doing his best to keep the files hidden. I think that's going to keep a percentage of the MAGA base away from even voting next year in 2026. But make clear, most of Trump's conservative MAGA media cheerleaders will back him. Most of the base will back him. It's what you're seeing people kind of below Trump fight to be the next MAGA voice. But I want to reiterate, it's a MAGA party. I mean, look at what we're doing this Sunday morning. My friend David Jolly, there would be nothing better in the world for Florida than to have a problem solver like David Jolly as Florida's governor. David's running as a Democrat. He's a good, genuine Democrat. Former Tea Party Joe Walsh guy is with you this Sunday morning as a Democrat. If that doesn't tell you we live in unprecedented political times, nothing will. America has to grasp that one of our two major political parties is now full on MAGA and full on anti-democracy, and it ain't coming back.